What if failure was never meant to stop you? What if every time you fell, life was quietly teaching you how to rise stronger? Failure doesn't destroy you, misunderstanding it does. Most people run from failure as if it were a sign of weakness. But failure is not an enemy, it is a message, a mirror, a moment of truth. When understood deeply, failure becomes one of the greatest sources of personal power. Failure often arrives quietly, not as a dramatic collapse, but as a subtle moment where something simply doesn't work. And in that moment, most people rush to judgment. They tell themselves a story: I am not good enough, I missed my chance, I wasn't meant for this. But failure is not speaking in that language. Failure does not judge, it instructs. Life never says you are finished. It says, pay attention. Alan Watts often spoke about how we misunderstand experience by turning it into identity. A failed attempt becomes a failed self. But experience does not define who you are. It reveals how you are interacting with the world. Failure is feedback, not a final sentence. When something fails, it is not rejecting you. It is revealing a misalignment between intention and action, expectation and reality. And misalignment is not shameful. It is natural. Every process, from learning to walk to learning how to live, includes falling. The problem is not failure. The problem is the meaning we attach to it. When we treat failure as a verdict, we stop exploring, we retreat, we tighten. But when we treat it as a teacher, curiosity replaces fear. We begin to ask better questions. What did this moment show me? What was I avoiding? What was I rushing past? Failure slows you down so that awareness can catch up. It interrupts momentum when momentum is heading in the wrong direction. And while the interruption feels uncomfortable, it is deeply intelligent. Think of how often success reinforces habits without questioning them. Failure, on the other hand, invites reflection. It reveals blind spots. It humbles the ego and opens the door to wisdom. This is why failure often precedes real growth, not because pain is necessary, but because honesty is. Failure does not ask you to punish yourself. It asks you to listen. When you listen, failure loses its power to define you. It becomes part of the process, not the end of it. You stop fearing it because you understand its role. And once understood, failure transforms from something you avoid into something you respect. Every setback carries information about timing, about readiness, about alignment. And when you use that information wisely, failure becomes fuel. Life is not testing your worth, it is refining your awareness. Think of a failure in your life that taught you something important. What did it reveal that success never could? Share your experience in the comments. Your insight might help someone else see their setback in a new way. Pain often feels personal. It feels like an attack on who you are. But what is really being challenged is not your true self. It is the image you are trying to protect. The ego is the story you tell yourself about who you are supposed to be. It is built from expectations, comparisons, and approval. And when life contradicts that story, the ego reacts with fear, defensiveness, and shame. That reaction is what we often mistake for suffering. Alan Watts reminded us that the self is not a fixed object. It is a process and unfolding relationship with experience. Growth, then, does not happen by protecting an identity. It happens by allowing that identity to loosen. When failure, criticism, or loss appears, the ego feels threatened. It wants to explain, justify, or escape. It asks, what will people think? What does this say about me? But reality is not concerned with appearances. Reality is concerned with truth, and truth has a way of refining us. The moment you stop defending your image, something remarkable happens. Energy that was once spent on self-protection becomes available for learning. Listening replaces resisting. Curiosity replaces fear. This is the moment the self begins to grow. The ego seeks comfort. The self seeks understanding. Ego pain is loud and dramatic. It tells you that something has gone terribly wrong. But beneath that noise there is a quieter invitation to see more clearly, to respond more honestly, to adapt. When you identify less with the ego, pain loses its sting. You begin to notice that discomfort is often a signal of expansion. Something old is dissolving, making space for something more aligned. Growth does not feel like improvement. It feels like vulnerability. You may feel uncertain, exposed, unsure of who you are becoming. But this uncertainty is not weakness, it is openness. It is the mind releasing rigid definitions so that awareness can deepen. The ego asks, "How do I look?" The self asks, "What is true?" When you shift from one question to the other, life becomes a teacher rather than a threat. You stop trying to control outcomes and start responding intelligently. And intelligence, in this sense, is not cleverness. It is sensitivity to what is happening now. Pain does not mean you are failing. It often means you are outgrowing an old version of yourself. Can you recall a moment when letting go of your image led to real growth? Share your experience in the comments. Your honesty might help someone else realize that their discomfort is not a setback but a breakthrough. Pain is unavoidable. Suffering is optional. The difference lies in resistance. Life delivers moments that hurt: failure, loss, disappointment. These moments arrive on their own, brief and sharp, like a sudden storm. But what often lingers long after the storm has passed is not the pain itself, but our refusal to let it be. Failure hurts once. Resistance hurts again and again. When something goes wrong, the mind immediately argues with reality. This shouldn't have happened. It's unfair. I can't accept this. And in that argument, pain transforms into suffering. The event is over, but the mind keeps replaying it, tightening around it, reliving it. Alan Watts spoke often about how suffering arises when we try to control what cannot be controlled. Resistance is an attempt to rewrite the past or force the present to match our expectations. And reality, unlike the ego, does not negotiate. Acceptance is not surrender in the way people fear. It is not giving up. It is seeing clearly. It is the simple acknowledgement, this is what is happening, and from that clarity, intelligent action becomes possible. When you accept pain, you stop feeding it with thought. You stop making it personal. You stop turning a moment into an identity. Pain remains a sensation, not a story. And without the story, pain passes naturally. Resistance says, this defines me. Acceptance says, this is happening. One creates suffering, the other creates space. In that space, something unexpected appears: understanding. You begin to see what the experience is showing you. Perhaps a misalignment, perhaps an attachment, perhaps a habit that no longer serves you. Pain, when accepted, becomes information. Suffering, when resisted, becomes noise. The mind fears acceptance because it mistakes it for weakness, but acceptance is strength. It requires courage to stop fighting reality. It requires humility to listen instead of argue, and it requires trust to allow experience to unfold without constant interference. When you stop resisting failure, failure stops chasing you. It no longer needs to repeat itself. Acceptance transforms pain into clarity. Clarity transforms experience into wisdom, and wisdom transforms setbacks into guidance. This is not passive living, it is responsive living. You are no longer reacting blindly, you are responding consciously. Life does not ask you to enjoy pain, it asks you to stop fighting it, because once you stop fighting, pain teaches, and then it leaves. Think of a moment where resisting reality made things harder for you. What changed when you finally accepted it? Share your reflection in the comments. Your insight may help someone release their own unnecessary suffering. Failure has a quiet way of simplifying life. When everything collapses, noise disappears, and in that silence, truth becomes visible. In moments of success, we are surrounded by illusions, illusions of control, certainty, and permanence. Success can distract us with comfort and validation, but failure removes what is unnecessary. It strips life down to its essentials. When things fall apart, what remains stands out clearly. Alan Watts often spoke about how suffering peels away the false layers of the self. Failure does the same. It exposes where we were pretending, where we were chasing approval, where we were living according to borrowed values rather than our own. What truly matters is not what survives failure, it is what continues to matter after failure. When plans collapse, relationships are tested, some dissolve, others deepen. When status fades, purpose becomes more important than appearance. When certainty is lost, presence becomes more valuable than prediction. Failure is not destruction, it is revelation. It reveals what you depended on that was never stable. It reveals which desires were rooted in fear rather than meaning, and it reveals which parts of you remain steady even when everything else shifts. You may discover that what you thought you needed was only something you wanted to impress others. You may realize that the thing you were afraid to lose was already costing you your peace. Failure brings these realizations not as punishment, but as clarity. When the illusion of control falls away, authenticity has space to emerge. You stop asking, "How does this look?" and start asking, "Does this feel true?" That shift alone changes the direction of a life. Failure also teaches gratitude, not for the loss itself, but for what was real all along, the relationships that endure, the values that remain intact, the inner strength that does not depend on circumstances. In this way, failure becomes a filter. It removes excess. It sharpens focus. Life becomes less about accumulation and more about alignment, less about proving and more about being. And what matters most becomes impossible to ignore. When you see clearly what matters, decisions simplify. You stop wasting energy on what no longer aligns. You move with intention rather than fear. And what once felt like collapse becomes a return to truth. Failure does not take everything away. It takes away what was never essential. After a failure in your life, what did you realize truly mattered? Share your experience in the comments. Your clarity might help someone else rediscover what's important in their own journey. There is a quiet shift that changes everything. It is the moment you stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and begin asking, "What can I do with what happened?" Blame feels comforting at first. It gives the mind somewhere to rest. Circumstances, people, timing, anything outside of us can become the reason things went wrong. But blame has a hidden cost. The moment you give responsibility away, you also give away power. Alan Watts often spoke about how we trap ourselves by resisting what is. Responsibility is not about self-judgment. It is about recognizing where choice still exists. Even when outcomes are beyond your control, your response never is. Failure only controls you as long as you believe you are powerless within it. When you take responsibility, something subtle but profound happens. You stop waiting to be rescued. You stop hoping conditions will change before you do. And in that moment, authority returns to where it belongs within you. Responsibility does not mean you caused everything. It means you choose how to move forward. This distinction is important. Many people avoid responsibility because they confuse it with blame. But responsibility is not punishment. It is freedom. It restores your ability to act. Blame keeps you stuck in the past. Responsibility places you in the present. And the present is the only place where change can occur. When you accept responsibility, failure loses its grip. It no longer defines you or controls your future. It becomes part of your experience, not the ruler of your life. You stop replaying what should have been and start shaping what can be. This is where inner authority is born, not from dominance or force, but from alignment. You trust yourself because you know you will respond, not react. You know you will learn, not collapse. Life does not ask for perfection. It asks for participation. Responsibility is the willingness to engage fully with life as it is, not as you wish it were. It is saying yes to reality and yes to your role within it. And when you do that, fear softens, clarity sharpens, and direction emerges. You realize that power has never been outside of you. It was only hidden beneath excuses. The moment you stop blaming circumstances, you stop being shaped by them. You begin shaping yourself. And that is where real power begins. Can you think of a moment when taking responsibility gave you back control? Share your experience in the comments. Your story may inspire someone else to reclaim their inner authority. Failure has a way of stopping us in our tracks. Plans collapse. Momentum fades. The noise of progress suddenly goes quiet. And in that pause, we often assume something has gone wrong. But what if nothing has gone wrong at all? Life does not always slow you down to punish you. Sometimes it slows you down to protect you from continuing in a direction that no longer serves you. Failure interrupts motion so awareness can catch up. Alan Watts often spoke about the importance of stillness, not as inactivity, but as clarity. When life moves too fast, we act on habit rather than understanding. Failure introduces a pause, forcing us to look rather than rush. Stillness is uncomfortable because it removes distraction. It leaves you alone with your thoughts, your motives, your fears. In the absence of movement, patterns become visible. You begin to notice where you were pushing instead of flowing, where ambition replaced alignment, where effort replaced presence. Failure creates this space not to judge, but to reveal. Many people fear the pause because it feels like falling behind. But behind what? Life is not a race. When you slow down, you begin to sense whether the path you were on was truly yours or merely familiar. Failure asks you to listen before you act again. In stillness, deeper awareness emerges. You recognize habits that were running unconsciously. You see expectations that were inherited rather than chosen. You notice tensions you were ignoring while moving too fast to feel them. This is not stagnation, it is recalibration. Just as nature pauses between seasons, growth in life also requires intervals of rest and reflection. Without these pauses, expansion becomes distortion. Failure provides the break necessary for realignment. When you honor the pause, direction clarifies naturally. You don't force the next step, you sense it. And when movement resumes, it is quieter, steadier, and more intentional. Life is not saying stop forever. It is saying look more closely. Failure slows you down so you can re-enter life with wisdom rather than urgency. It invites you to move forward from understanding, not from fear of falling behind. And when you move again from this deeper awareness, progress feels lighter, more honest, more true. Failure is not a dead end. It is a pause between movements. Have you experienced a moment where slowing down helped you see something you were missing? Share your reflection in the comments. Your pause may help someone else trust theirs. We expect growth to be loud, a breakthrough, a turning point, a moment where everything suddenly changes. But real growth rarely announces itself. True transformation happens quietly, often unnoticed by the world, and sometimes even by you. We are conditioned to believe that change must be dramatic to be meaningful. We look for signs, motivation, confidence, visible success. But growth does not work that way. It unfolds slowly beneath the surface, like roots forming before a tree ever breaks the ground. Alan Watts often reminded us that nature does not rush, yet everything is accomplished. Growth follows the same rhythm. It is not a performance, it is a process. While the ego wants recognition, growth prefers silence. It happens when you pause instead of reacting, when you listen instead of defending, when you choose patience over urgency. These moments don't feel impressive, they don't earn applause, but they reshape you more deeply than any dramatic decision ever could. Reflection is one of the quiet tools of growth. Sitting with discomfort, asking honest questions, noticing patterns. This is not exciting work. It is subtle, but it is powerful. Each moment of awareness loosens an old habit. Each moment of humility dissolves an old illusion. Growth also requires patience, the patience to let change mature. When we rush transformation, we force outcomes that are not yet ready. Quiet growth allows understanding to settle into behavior, not just thought. You may not notice growth while it's happening. You notice it later when you respond differently, when old triggers lose their grip, when silence feels comfortable instead of empty. That is how you know change has occurred. Dramatic change often fades as quickly as it arrives. Quiet growth endures. It rewires how you relate to life, not just how you think about it. And because it is quiet, it does not depend on external validation. It belongs to you. True growth does not seek attention, it seeks alignment. It is the steady shift toward honesty, toward presence, toward simplicity. And over time, those quiet shifts accumulate into a life that feels lighter, clearer, and more authentic. You don't need to announce your growth. You don't need to prove it. You simply live it. And one day you realize you are no longer who you used to be. Had you noticed a quiet change in yourself that others might not see? Share your experience in the comments. Your reflection could remind someone that real growth doesn't need to be loud to be real. Failure only feels powerful when it is misunderstood. When you see it as an enemy, it chases you. When you understand it, it serves you. Most people fear failure because they believe it repeats for no reason. But failure is not random, it is purposeful. It returns only when its lesson has not been learned. Once understood, it has no need to revisit your life. Alan Watts often spoke about how wisdom arises not from avoiding experience, but from fully meeting it. Failure becomes power at the moment you stop resisting it and start listening to what it reveals. Understanding transforms memory into insight. When you reflect honestly on failure, patterns emerge. You begin to see where fear guided your choices, where attachment narrowed your vision, where awareness was absent. This clarity is not harsh, it is liberating. It shows you how to move differently next time. Failure loses its emotional charge when it becomes information. It stops defining you and starts guiding you. What once felt like weakness becomes discernment. You recognize signs earlier, you make decisions with more patience, you trust process instead of impulse. Failure, once integrated, sharpens your intuition. This is how power develops quietly. True power is not domination or control, it is understanding. It is the ability to respond consciously rather than repeat unconsciously. And nothing builds this power faster than lived experience examined with honesty. Failure teaches you where not to place your identity. It shows you that worth is not dependent on outcome. It dissolves illusions of certainty and replaces them with adaptability. When you stop fearing failure, life opens. You take thoughtful risks. You explore without desperation. You move forward without carrying old weight. Failure, when understood, becomes a compass. It points away from paths that drain you and toward choices that align you. It protects you from repeating the same patterns disguised as new opportunities. This is why failure no longer needs to return. Its work is complete. What once broke your confidence now builds your wisdom. What once slowed you down now sharpens your direction. And what once felt like loss becomes the foundation of insight. Failure does not weaken the conscious mind, it strengthens it. And when you walk forward, guided by understanding rather than fear, failure becomes one of your greatest allies. What failure in your life became a source of strength after you understood it? Share your story in the comments. Your wisdom could help someone else turn their setback into power. Failure was never the enemy, it was the messenger. It arrived not to break you but to wake you, not to punish you but to teach you. And once you listened, it no longer needed to stay. Life is not asking you to be flawless, it is asking you to be aware, because awareness turns experience into wisdom and wisdom into power. So when failure appears, don't rush to escape it. Sit with it, listen to it, understand it. Because the moment you do, it stops controlling your future and starts guiding it, and that is how failure becomes power.